Thanks for dropping by. Just wanted to explain a little bit about what was involved in this webinar, the Compliance Plus webinar. Somebody told me at one stage that you had to be able to answer 3 questions about webinars. Why this, why now, and why me? Now the why now is pretty easy to answer. We've got the new rules coming in July 1. New Act, new obligations, more extensive obligations with much greater focus on management systems and supervision are the 2 major foci of this particular webinar. Failure to supervise appropriately can result in findings of unsatisfactory conduct, professional misconduct. An audit regime is in place, and the obligation falls on all supervising principals. On top of that, the consequences of failing an audit or falling short are quite dramatic. The regulatory authorities have powers which are extremely extensive. They extend, for instance, to providing you with management system directions about what you should do about and how you should conduct your practice. It applies to all principals, as well as the lawyer that might have been involved in the conduct which is seen to be inappropriate or unreasonable. But I don't want to get hung up on the compliance side of things. The webinar is called Compliance Plus, and what I seek to do is to identify the links between type of regimes that are mandatory pursuant to the rules and the Act and simply running a good practice. This is an important point. Many of these practices, even if practiced at the minimum level, are good for business. If they're practiced at a level which is best practice, then they are indeed very powerful instruments to drive a profitable and successful practice. So I promised you a little bit about me. 30 odd years practicing as a solicitor, barrister, finally as a managing partner. First firm I managed was about 5 partners and about 50 souls all told, and eventually graduating, if that's the word, up to managing one of the largest firms in Australia with offices all over Australia, New Zealand and Southeast Asia, and the last 15 years as a consultant to legal practice and other professional service firms. More recently I've been involved in either helping firms in their audit experience, both from the point of view of the firm and also on behalf of some of the regulatory authorities. So I've seen it from both sides, as it were, and that's why I thought this webinar was appropriate at this particular time. So what does a webinar cover? Well, firstly, of course, the essential legal requirements. What's the baseline that we're setting here? What I've developed, however, is just a systematic approach to identifying, implementing, documenting and monitoring the systems that are mandatory. And I've done that by looking at each of the actions that are required to be undertaken by a practice or by a supervising principal in order to comply, and then looked at what best practice is in the area and married the 2. So I've got actions around documentation of policies, of supervisory practices, how one runs a proper meeting, whether it be amongst your partners, whether it be a team meeting or a board type meeting. I talk about management and financial processes, obviously billing and particularly reporting. In other words, what sort of financial report should you be getting as a regular feed from either your IT system and or your bookkeeper, accountant, or from your external advisors. I look at client and matter management, things like communication, delay, file opening, closing, maintaining records, etc. I look at staff and partner monitoring. In other words, what sort of employment practices should you have in place? How do you conduct those all-important discussions, whether they be with staff or partners? How do you institute regimes, education and training regimes to carry these processes forward? And also, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be comparing typical compliance processes, procedures, systems and documentation, which can be contrasted with what might be considered to be best practice. And finally, a few words about the webinar process itself. Many of you may have participated in webinars. I did one the other day in New York remotely and another one in Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places. They're very constructive, useful ways of imparting knowledge and getting a decent interaction between the presenter, as it were, and the audience. So in this case there'll be a 40-minute presentation from myself, You'll obviously have been provided with the checklist I promised on registration prior to that. There'll be question and answers throughout by way of a chat line down the side of the screen, as it were. You don't need any special equipment other than a browser. If you can search Google, you can participate in a webinar. You'll be sent reminders. You'll be taken to a registration page initially when you click on the link below to register, and then prior to the actual webinar you'll, as I said, be sent reminders and be invited to click on a box which will take you into the webinar room and the chat room, and it's all pretty self-evident from there. There'll be sufficient information and value provided in order to allow you to conduct your own compliance or your self-assessment audit, or if you'd like some help from myself, then there's a package I'll offer there called Compliance Plus, when there is a special offer to be made. There's always a special offer in webinars, I've found out. There'll be 20% discount on my usual fee for the first 10 people who decide that they would like some help. Click on the registration button below here. You'll get the checklist immediately. You'll then get reminders, and I look forward to seeing you online and hearing about your experiences in the compliance world and your suggestions, because one thing's for sure, nobody knows it all, and I think our collective input will be well worth the 40 minutes or so attendance if you'd like to come along, so please participate.